Oh wait, I'm going to the Comedy Attic on Friday. I don't know with who yet. I bought 2 tickets. I have one friend out here, and I told him I was like, hey, um, I might take you to this, but I'm not sure. I have like 2 people to choose from. I could go with the old dude that I used to work with at Jackson Creek. I could take him. I don't know. He's not old. He's like 35. He's a nice guy. I don't know. I'm just, my plans are up in the air. I don't know who's worthy yet, but I bought the tickets, so we'll see how it goes. I don't know why I did that. I've just never been to a stand-up comedy show, and I was like, well, I'm not going to go alone. So I bought 2 without actually making plans to go with anybody, but knowing that I would be able to find somebody to go with, right? Worst case scenario, I'll just go on like Match.com and find some random 40-year-old woman, do what she wants to do. Anyways, I'm glad that's in the class recording. How's everybody doing? All right. Last class we talked about the Iron Curtain. All right. The Iron Curtain descends. This is that in-between area, the sharp distinction between Western Europe, democratic Western Europe, and then you have the, Eastern Soviet bloc. You have all of these guys in the Soviet Union are super pro-communism. One of the important things that we saw last class that is going to be a theme of this class is just the fact that poor, economically destroyed, infrastructurally destroyed nations in Europe are going to, be relatively susceptible to communist rule. Reason being, you look at a lot of these things, a lot of the things in the Communist Manifesto, a lot of the things in the way that communism is run, and you're like, man, doesn't sound that bad to me right now. So Churchill's also talking about this because and this is something that we'll talk about today too, is that there's just a huge, it's like entering into a different universe. I made the distinction in the last class that I taught of like, in WandaVision where they walk into a different universe. Has anybody seen WandaVision? Well, anyway, they basically go into, it's like a border, and as soon as they walk over, they're in like the 60s or something like that. It's like walking into another world, right? That is the difference that you see here between the Western countries, the Western Democratic and the Eastern Soviet. And a big thing too is that people are like, man, we don't know like what is the truth beyond this Iron Curtain? Like what is the truth that's happening over there? What is really going on? Are they telling the truth to their citizens and so on and so forth? So this is again just showing you kind of what's going on. Remember, Stalin's like, I need Poland or I'm gonna die. If I don't have Poland, I will die. Without Poland, it's so important to me. And then all of a sudden, he's like, and I need Eastern Germany, and I think I need Czechoslovakia, and Hungary sounds nice this time of year, and maybe Romania and Bulgaria, and then so on and so forth. And people are getting worried, right? They're like, man, they're really expanding. They're expanding very quickly. They're like worried that eventually the Soviets are going to be like, and Sweden sounds nice, and maybe Spain, and what if we just took it all, right? Is kind of the thought process that people are worried about. You also have to think about the kind of democratic agenda that's happening here. A lot of these countries, again, are susceptible. If the U.S. had it their way, what do you think the governments of these countries would be? Democratic, right? But why do you think, again, in some of the kind of conversations that we've had, why do you think they were so susceptible to Soviet rule? Yeah. Yeah, they're not in a very good position right now, right? They're kind of in a rough position here. Their economies are kind of in the tank. They're not doing very well at all. Infrastructurally, a lot of their stuff is damaged. You have to remember, there's no, German Nazi paramilitary troops being dropped in the middle of Indiana, right? That's not happening out here. But is there battling out here in a lot of these areas? Yes. Is there battling in Poland and in Soviet Union? Yeah, there's battling all over these places. So you do see a lot of that. And people are still, it takes a long time or a decent amount of time at least to recover after a war, and not as long as you would think, probably about 10 to 15 years sometimes. Sometimes, other countries do a little bit worse, but at least in the context of World War II, a decent amount of them do recover surprisingly fast. But in that weird in-between point, that is where they're most susceptible. So the U.S. wants to come in and, obviously they have their own agenda. We hate communism, so we would much rather have all of these things be democratic. Same thing with probably France and the UK as well, right? So again, in the way that the Allies are set up, the Soviet Union's kind of like the weird kid at the lunch table. I also said it was like if you had a booth in a restaurant, and usually if there's 4 people, you put 2 on one side, 2 on the other. It's more like the U.S., the UK, France over here on this side, and then the Soviet Union's over there crying about how nobody wants to sit with them. And it's because they just have differences in world views and economic and governmental views as well. So this is the Iron Curtain. We're talking about containment. When I say containment, when you contain something, what do you think they're trying to contain? The spread of what? You know it. Yeah, communism, right? The spread of communism. Containment policy, okay? So they're worried. They're worried, and this is the stuff that I've been kind of saying before we got to the point of it, but they're worried that the Soviet influence is going to spread to the rest of Europe. So they start this containment policy. And looking at this, it's proposed by this guy, George F. Kennan, and he does it in this thing called the Long Telegram, which we'll talk about next. We'll talk more in depth about the Truman Doctrine, but it basically helps nations fight communist control. The Marshall Plan helps those countries by giving money. The Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan go together, right? They're like two pieces of a puzzle. Truman said that they were like two sides of a walnut. That sounds like something a really old person would say, though, so let's go with the puzzle thing. I don't know. I don't really, do you guys like eat walnuts? Does anybody here eat walnuts? They're not bad. I think Mr. Adams has like a bag of them on his desk or something. I don't know. I think I saw that last time I went in there. Weird legume. Is that what they're called? I don't know. Is that a bean? That's a bean. I don't know. I'm rambling. Anyways, again, very happy that this is in the recorded lecture. So, looking at this, checking for understanding. What is the Iron Curtain? What is that? What is it? What does it kind of signify? Yeah, border between the West and Soviets. It's that line, that distinction between, democratic and communist. What is the containment policy? What are we containing? Communism, right? And then what are satellite nations? Anybody remember what those are? What are those satellite nations? So you don't need the actual names for like what nations it was, but like what is happening with them? Any idea? Yeah, they orbit around the Soviets, right? And that's an interesting kind of thing in the time. You have to think, we're not really doing this whole satellite space thing. This is new, right? So they're drawing on that from like the other contextual things that are happening at the time. Sputnik and space race and all this other stuff. They take that, they're like, oh, these are satellite nations. They're like, hey, look at that. That's kind of cool. It fits in here too. There are these nations that are around the Soviets that have to basically follow the will of the Soviets. They have to do things that are pre-approved under communism, pre-approved under Stalin. They're not going to really be standing up to Stalin because they're pretty tightly guarded and held. A lot of this land is stuff, that previously was not communist or maybe had some communist, inklings in it, but now it is definitely orbiting around the Soviet Union. So we have this thing. It's called the Long Telegram, which, it's basically like a very long paper, okay? George Kennan, he's a U.S. advisor. He's reporting from the American Embassy in Moscow. Again, it's interesting to know that these are still things during this time for the most part. The fact that is even a thing, the American Embassy in Moscow. It does get at the idea of the fact that, again, this is a Cold War. It's a lot of, how can we step on your toes without irritating you too much, right? And that's kind of what Kennan is going to be talking about a little bit. He claims that the Soviets' worldview is coming from this traditional Russian sense of insecurity and fear of the West. Obviously, that's probably a pretty American way of thinking. It's probably a pretty, allied way of kind of painting that picture of like, oh, they're insecure and scared, right? Whether or not he's right on that, he has got other things that he'll talk about as well, but he makes some pretty valid points on some things. But obviously, that's probably something that if you ask the Russians why they're doing what they're doing, they're probably not going to say it's because we're insecure and scared, right? It's probably not going to be that way. But that is Kennan's kind of analysis. It goes a little bit more in depth, and we'll talk about it more. But Kennan suggests that the U.S. uses diplomatic, economic, and military actions to keep communism contained. However, we want to stay in this Cold War. Kennan doesn't say to come out and like blast them away. He doesn't say to come out and like put the world or war-causing sanctions on them or anything like that. He's got more of a different idea, and we'll talk about that now. So this is Kennan's kind of perspective on like what he's seeing in Russia. Kennan says that the USSR perceived itself at perpetual war with capitalism, which, you know, on the flip side, to their credit, the U.S. is probably seeing ourselves at a perpetual war with communism. And that is obviously something we're going to see forward with, you know, the Red Scare, with the Cold War, with Cuba, with Vietnam, all these different things during the time. You know, a lot of this stuff is going to be, you know, characterized by this Democrat versus communist type of perspective. The USSR viewed left-wing but non-communist groups in other countries as an even worse enemy of itself than the capitalist ones. So the USSR is seeing a lot of the territories around them as being, you know, a threat, right? So that maybe explains a little bit why they're expanding as much as they are. Again, the USSR is going to use these controllable Marxists and capitalist world as allies. So this is where some of that fear comes from. This is where the fear comes from with the Red Scare. This is where the fear comes from with, I don't think we watched the film. Did we watch the film last class, Red Nightmare? Did we watch that at all? Maybe. I probably didn't force you guys to watch it, but the idea in that is that, you know, you have a lot of fear about people infiltrating the capitalist society, right? A lot of fear about Marxists or communists infiltrating the United States. And that's where you get a lot of people being like, oh, I don't like Dave at work. Well, I guess he's a communist, right? And then people start getting persecuted and things like that. But this is like one of those fears. They think that these Marxists are going to be used as allies in this this eventual communist agenda that's going to be taking place, you know, in America and in other countries. This is a big fear. Has anybody ever seen this TV show, The Americans? It's on Amazon Prime. It's really good. I would watch it if I were you guys. I think I watched the first season. I really liked it. I think I'm on season 2. But it follows KGB agents who are like secret agents in the United States. It's a really, really solid show. Just a side note, if you're interested in any of this stuff, it's a pretty solid TV series. Soviet aggression was fundamentally not aligned with the views of Russian people or with economic reality, but rooted in historic Russian nationalism. He goes as far as to say that it's like more than that. He says it's nationalism, which again is that idea that promotes like this interest of a particular nation, building, maintaining, expanding the idea of this national identity. But he also says it's like neurosis, right? He's saying that there's like a mental aspect to play here too. He's saying like they're constantly distressed, right? And again, if you're the Soviets, you're probably looking at this. If you do read this, you're like, we're not distressed. You know, maybe we are, but we're not like, we don't have a mental illness here. But that's something that's being kind of characterized in the Soviet Union during the time. Important to see, though, that they're painting, you know, this idea that, hey, this isn't aligned with the views of the Russian people or the economic reality, but instead it's rooted in this kind of idea of like, how can Russia expand and take up the most space and be the most powerful? And again, this is getting back at that idea of the Iron Curtain, right? The Soviet government structure prohibited objective or accurate pictures of internal and external reality. What does that mean to you guys? What does that sound like? Prohibiting what? Yeah, maybe government slander, right? And you see that in communism, right? You're not going to really talk about Stalin in a poor way. But also, if you're talking about the Iron Curtain, remember we saw that Churchill is basically saying, like, we don't know what beyond this curtain is truth. And a lot of the people, according to Kenner, don't know either. A lot of these people are looking at this and saying, you know, they're not really aligned with reality. They're kind of in this alternate reality, like whatever, you know, works for them. So with the Iron Curtain, you know, what do we know to be truth? Kennan also encouraged a long-term but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies. So essentially, Kennan wants to avoid hot war. He wants to keep a close eye on the Russians and curb their expansion whenever possible without really initiating like a serious conflict. So it's not really the idea of the American, you know, government or, you know, Truman or whoever at the time to look at this and say, all right, let's instigate with Russia. It's kind of a hands-off, but also like, you know, keep a close eye, make sure you have them on a tight leash, things like that without, you know, irritating them too much. Kind of a lot of the things that we see with, I feel like North Korea sometimes too. Feels like we always have them on a tight leash, but we're not here with the you know, the sole purpose of pushing them to the brink of war. And that's a lot of the stuff that you're seeing during this time as well. That is Kennan's perspective on the Russians. Now, we have this idea of the Truman Doctrine. So again, remember the Truman Doctrine is going to go directly with the Marshall Plan, and that is important to know. Free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures, right? This is who it's targeting. You want to be able to free those people. The immediate goal with the Truman Doctrine is to help Turkey and Greece fight off communist revolutions. That is the immediate goal. Stalin's making all these demands to gain joint control of the Dardanelles. God, it's so hard to say. Dardanelles with Turkey. The Dardanelles were a vital route from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. So there's some positives to be had if you control that area. The U.S. sent the aircraft carriers USS Missouri and the Franklin D. Roosevelt to protect Turkey and eastern Mediterranean areas as well. At the same time, you have Britain is over there in Greece, and they're fighting Greek communists who had launched a guerrilla war against the Greek government. And then on top of this, the big thing that you see with the Truman Doctrine is that there is this approval of $400 million to fight the communist aggression in Greece and Turkey. So the long-term goal here is to fight the spread of communism. It's like if you think about, a disease spreading throughout the body. Sometimes you got to cut off a limb or something so that the disease stops spreading, or poison or things like that, right? That's the kind of idea that they have with communism. You got to cut off the head of the snake or whatever to stop it from living and, stop things from growing. That is the worry that we have here. But in looking at this, why do you think, looking at this image, why do you think that Turkey might be the main focus? Any idea? How about someone online? Why do you guys think that Turkey might be a main focus? And why are we worried about Turkey turning communist? What do you guys think? Oscar, Chase? Oh, come on. You guys can know this. Anybody? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Say again. I'm sorry. Yes, it's the bridge between them, right? It's the bridge between them. It's the same thing that we saw with Poland, right? But even more so, we worried with Poland, okay, the Soviets are turning Poland communist, and then you see all those other countries around them kind of turn communist. It's the same idea, the same worry that we have eventually with Vietnam and the domino effect, and the things that are described there. But right, you're exactly right on what you said. It's the bridge between, Europe and the Middle East. So you can see your big worry is that if these countries, Bulgaria, some communism there, if this stuff starts spreading to Turkey, you're worried if you're a democratic nation that eventually it's going to spread to Syria and it's going to spread to Iraq and Iran and other countries in the Middle East. And then you're worried of how big does the Soviet Union get? How big does communism get? Is it going to be a matter of, half the world is communist and half the world is democratic nations? And then how long until that is kind of hurt as well? So yes, that is absolutely correct. Excellent answer there, and you're kind of hitting it right on the head. They're worried about the spread, and this is a natural land bridge for things like that to happen. So that's where we're focusing a lot of our efforts. We also have the Marshall Plan, July 1946. It's aiding European nations in rebuilding their economies. Secretary of State John C. Marshall is kind of coming up with this. Keeping European countries healthy was essential to the containment of communism. Again, why is that the case? Why do we want them to have good economies? What is it about communism that preys on, lesser economies? What's the big thing that you're seeing on there? Anybody remember? Exactly, right? Distribution of wealth. Think about it this way. If you're somebody who is homeless, you've got and it's kind of a morbid way to look at some of this stuff. Obviously, I'm in the vein of thinking that, everybody deserves to have a home and all these other stuff, but all these other things, everybody deserves to have food in their stomach and everything like that. But if you think about it in a capitalistic versus communist way, the worry here is that all these countries who are kind of struggling, all these countries that are very poor and having a hard time, having a higher number of poor populations, are going to look at things like, wealth distribution. And they're like, doesn't sound that bad. Sounds pretty good. They're going to look at things like, government mandated schools and healthcare. Like, Fantastic, works for me. I can't afford that stuff anyway. Government housing, all right, sounds good. And overlooking all the maybe positive things that they might associate with communism, it allows that system of government to spread, and that's the worry that they have here. So what does the U.S. do? Well, the U.S. goes ahead and they bump, billions of dollars in Western Europe with supplies, machinery, food, right? And the idea is to give those people the things that they're probably seeking out of communist countries without them having to go that route. Again, economic growth makes communism less appealing. It kind of shies people away from worrying about, where their next meal is going to come from and whether or not they need to rely entirely on the government. And it keeps them in the more democratic sense, the more capitalistic sense of things. Keeping European countries strong and healthy would keep them from falling into the hands of communism, right? The poor are the ones who benefit from communism. The majority of time, those and potentially the corrupt as well. Too much economic struggle could result in the desire for economic equality. Again, whether your opinion on that is whatever it might be, this is the kind of thought process that you have during this time. Next, and we'll finish off with this slide here, or the next one I think as well. We have 1949, NATO comes around, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's created as a military alliance with the Western Democratic side of Europe. You have all these countries obviously in blue there that are involved in NATO. The U.S. commitment to maintaining peace in Europe, again, of course, at their own agenda, right? Yes, we want to maintain peace, but as long as it fits with what we think, so don't overlook things like that. 12 original countries were members. They vowed to come to each other's defense if they were attacked. So if any of these countries in NATO are attacked by anybody else, it's kind of like a, hey, if you do this, I got your back, you got my back kind of situation. And, the Soviets kind of look at this and they're like, all right, like, what's this all about? We got like beef? Is this what's happening? All these countries. In 1955, NATO allowed West Germany also to arm itself and join NATO. So remember, there's still East Germany, West Germany. It's kind of an issue there. And they're also looking at, the Soviets are looking at it, so like, are you serious? Like 1955, by the way, not that long following, World War II. They're looking at this and like, you're going to give those guys weapons again, especially like on our border now, what is now our border. The Soviets are shocked. They're appalled. They're offended, right? After all, imagine the fact, during this time, there's probably a lot of hate towards the German people as well, especially within the Soviets, following things like Stalingrad and mainland invasions and the continued lack of reparations payments that the Soviets are receiving. So they're pretty mad about this. And in turn, they create this Warsaw Pact among Eastern communist countries. As you can imagine, it's kind of going to look like this, right? You have all the countries behind the Iron Curtain following with the Soviets, and then you have NATO. So it's like, oh, you have a group? Well, now I have a group, and mine's cooler, and we like the color red. And that's pretty much it, right? You have the Warsaw Pact. 1955, Eastern communist countries create the Warsaw Pact. It's a military alliance. Again, same idea. Oh, you attacked the Soviet Union? Well, then you're going to have to answer to the giant empire of Bulgaria or whatever they have. I don't know what their empires were like back then or what their militaries were like. But that's kind of the idea there. You attack the Soviet Union. Well, you have to answer to Czechoslovakia and a bunch of other people too. And I think Yugoslavia as well. I have a list of the countries as well. Next slide, and we'll look at that. So it's basically the communist version of NATO. It's the red version of NATO. NATO is more democratic. Warsaw Pact is more communist. Here's some countries. So again, and this goes any way. You attack Albania, well, then you're going to have to answer to all these guys. You attack Bulgaria, well, you're going to have to answer to all these guys too. Same thing on the other side. You attack, France, Belgium, the U.S., the United Kingdom. Obviously, you can see some of these people are more powerhouses, but do not mistake the strength of the Soviet Union. They are pretty strong during this time, and they're definitely putting forth a lot of that effort towards the nuclear arms race. Okay, so you have all that stuff going on, and again, Hungary. It doesn't matter. Hungary attacks somebody random, the Netherlands, right? All these people are going to kind of go to war, right? So again, you can see where a Warsaw Pact or a NATO military alliance, this is going to feed into some of the serious tension that you have during the Cold War. Then it's like, we can't make any wrong steps. Albania gets attacked by one of these people, and you're like, oh my gosh, here we go. World War III probably, right? They're going to have a kind of a serious situation there. So a lot of concern about that, but people kind of look at this and they're like, maybe this is also at the same time, maybe this is a deterrent, right? That's the same thing that we see with a lot of nuclear weapons. Many times people talk about the fact of like full-blown nuclear annihilation. The fact that that's a thing, the fact that mutual destruction is a thing, is potentially also a deterrent, right? You're not going to fire a nuke on me because you know that if you fire a nuke on me, I'm firing 15 on you, and then we're all going to die, right? So maybe that's a similar thing here. You're not going to attack someone like Albania because you know that if you do that, then we're all going to attack each other, and then we're going to go into some full-blown kind of full-scale war. So, maybe in that context, this could be a positive thing in avoiding conflict, but who knows? Something to keep in mind, right? Any questions on anything that we talked about today? Any questions at all? Just remember, Marshall Plan, Truman Doctrine, they go together. Remember, the long telegram, stuff like that. Let's see what else. Containment policy, really important. We're containing communism in the promotion of democratic nations as well. It is also probably important to know about Turkey, why Turkey is kind of a central point. No NATO, no Warsaw Pact, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so we'll watch this crash course on the Cold War really quick, and then I will let you guys take your formative, and then that will be pretty much it. So let's see. I think this will pull up.
At Wolf Park near Lafayette.
Oh my gosh. Wolf Park. Is this a thing? Anybody ever been there? Anybody ever pet a wolf? No? I have a vivid memory. Really weird. Please don't judge me for this. When I was younger, I remember going to a wolf something. I don't know. It could have been that place for all I know. And when you left, they gave you a vial of wolf hair. I don't know why. So I just had wolf hair for the longest time. I felt like I was in like the TV show Twilight, or the movie Twilight. I felt like I had Jacob's hair or something. I don't know. Anyways, again, super happy that that's in the recorded class. Go ahead and stop recording now.